Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Freedom Report. Today is our very first video podcast. We decided to go ahead and throw them up online just because we thought some people may listen to them in their cars, but other people may want to watch a video and see what Ian and I look like. So Ian, welcome to the show.
Hey there.
This is what we look like. But if you're listening to us and you can't see what we look like, then you're listening to our podcast, and I want to say thank you for subscribing. Today we're going to talk about a topic that's very controversial. This was a story that we saw this morning out of NBC News. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, at least 150,000 to 200,000 girls in the U.S. are at risk of being forced to undergo female genital mutilation. The CDC says at risk because there are no actual records of the practice, only estimates, and old estimates at that. The latest data comes from 1997, which is the year after it was banned here in the United States. But citing anecdotal evidence from health professionals and frontline workers, experts who work with victims and their communities say that FGM, is what it's known as, is on the rise. The reason that they say this is on the rise is because immigration from African countries has quadrupled between 1990 and 2011, and they say that 90% of women from the Somali community in Phoenix, Arizona, Ian, are mutilated. They call it mutilation. But what the big debate in this is the difference between what they call female genital mutilation, which is also known as circumcision, but it's also referred to as circumcision when you do it to a man. And there is a big activist group out there. They call themselves intactivists. And intactivists, what they are people who advocate against circumcision in all forms. And actually, most industrialized nations with advanced medical health systems, they actually don't do circumcision. I believe it's the United States. What was the finding that we found?
The United States, Canada, and Australia are the Western countries which do the most male circumcision.
Right.
It's also extremely common in the Middle East and in Africa.
Right, circumcision, if you're not familiar, actually originated as a tribal and religious ceremony. It's most often practiced by Christians and by Jews and Muslims. And the nations that tend to be more secular actually tend to have less circumcisions. So the thing that we're going to debate today is circumcision from a health perspective and circumcision from a moral perspective, from a natural rights perspective. You know, Ian and myself, we being libertarians, we believe that humans have the right to own their bodies, and that you should be able to choose what you put into your body. You should also be able to choose what you do with your body. But the question is children can't give consent. Should parents be able to give consent for them? And I'll compare it to other medical procedures, things such as like vaccines, for example. Now, a child can't consent to a vaccine, but arguably, you know, a vaccine has proven health benefits. And so the question really is, Ian, do you think that there is a major difference between female genital mutilation between men and women? And if so, should it be banned or should it not be banned? Is this a religious freedom issue? What are your thoughts on this, Ian?
Well, I think it's definitely an apples to oranges comparison, both because men and women are different and the health consequences of male and female circumcision are very different. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of benefits that large studies attribute to male circumcision, whereas there's only detriment really attributed to female circumcision. For example, in infants, an uncircumcised male infant has a 10 times greater risk of a urinary tract infection than a circumcised male infant. Whereas in females, so-called female circumcision actually increases the risk of a urinary tract infection. A female circumcision also causes all sorts of long-term damage. It can cause urethra damage, for example. Right.
The argument, and when we bring it to from a health issue to a moral issue, the argument against having a woman circumcised, you know, is that there is no health benefits, and the reason we're doing this is because we are trying to deny females pleasure.
It's also not done by doctors. That's another big difference.
Well, and here's the reason why it's not done by doctors. The reason why we don't have FGM performed by doctors is because, number one, it's illegal in most places, and so if it's illegal, then obviously it's driven underground, and also because people are afraid of losing their families. If they come out in the open that there's female genital mutilation, then it would rip their families apart, and you can understand why a young girl would be terrified of losing her family. I mean, if someone were to come out and say, hey, my family practices female genital mutilation, then the state would come in and they would destroy their families, and that's something that, you know, that anybody would worry about. You know, as a libertarian, I fear the consequences of big government getting too involved in our personal affairs. So I'm very torn on this because I find the practice abhorrent. But I think that for personal moral reasons, I also have to find the male equivalent abhorrent. And I'll tell you why. Because the issue is one of consent. And although, you may say I'm a hypocrite because I think, children should be vaccinated, the difference is that the male body is designed to be that way. It's designed. We're designed. If you believe in a creator, I'm secular, but the human body was designed to have a foreskin for a reason, and there are studies that do show that men who have foreskins are also more immune to diseases in certain aspects. Now, the diseases that they cite are that it could be protected against, and there's a Time magazine study that we'll look at in a moment, is HIV. They say that men who have communities of men who are more circumcised have a much reduced risk at having HIV. But the problem with that is that
HPV. As well.
HPV. But the problem with that is that you're supposed to be wearing condoms anyway. The best way to stop the transmission of the human immunodeficiency virus is to use condoms or use abstinence. And you may say, oh, well, that's unrealistic. But, how many things would we cut off of someone's bodies if we thought that there was some, increased health risk? We're not supposed to have an appendix. Maybe if we cut people's appendixes out when they're kids, that way they would never have to worry about having an appendix. There's a lot of sides to this debate, but I think that the issue here is that you have consent, and everybody gets really upset and hung up over this issue. I think mostly because it becomes a religious issue, it becomes a personal issue. But the problem is that religious people tend to make the argument that they own their kids, and I don't believe that you own your child.
Let's go back to the health benefits for a minute.
Okay.
I think many religious traditions exist for a reason, and in the case of male circumcision, the reason it reduces the prevalence of HIV, and it sounds like we agree there, and also HPV and some other viruses, is that male circumcision reduces the prevalence of bacteria. It decreases opportunity for bacteria to grow and spread. And for that reason, there's studies also showing that it reduces incidence of cancer. So remember, I talked also a minute ago about reduced incidence of urinary tract infections, specifically in infants. Infants are especially vulnerable to this sort of thing. So you're quite right to bring up vaccines, in that I believe in a creator, but I also believe in modern medicine, and I think there's a sense in which you are obligated to provide for the medical care of your kid to the best of your ability. You've volunteered to bring this person into existence, and so it really is a sort of aggression and a sort of violence not to feed them or care for them to the best of your ability. I can't invite Austin to fly with me in a plane that I own and then push him out of the plane in midair just because the plane is my property. I sort of have assumed responsibility for Austin's well-being by inviting him.
A nonverbal contract of a sense is what you're talking about
here. You do something like that when you bring another person into existence. Now, I do think that parents should have some rights over their children and should be able to make decisions to benefit their children. The human brain finishes developing when you're in your mid-20s. And I know a lot of people even that played strings instruments or piano when they were younger, which I did, and quit those things, look back and say, man, I really wish my parents had just made me continue playing that. Yeah. Obviously that's substantially less severe, but even in that circumstance, we look back and wish that our parents had made certain decisions for us because we recognize they know better in some areas. Now, in this area, just hypothetically, imagine that you decided you do think circumcision is the right thing to do, but you're not circumcised as an adult. Obviously, you're going to have to undergo and experience much more pain than you would have as an infant. You wouldn't even have remembered the pain as an infant, and you would have thought to yourself, I really wish my parents had made this decision for me when I was an infant, as opposed to sticking it with me now.
Well, how many people are actually adults and then decide to get circumcised? I would probably wager that it's none. I mean,
because probably it'd be so horrific, the thought of doing it.
Right, but the thing is that you can mitigate your risk of getting sexually transmitted diseases in other ways other than cutting a body part off, right? And it's not, and to be intellectually honest, it's not to say that there aren't problems with the human body as it's been quote unquote designed, because obviously obviously we have wisdom teeth that grow in, and they don't grow in properly. And if you don't remove your wisdom teeth, then you're going to have a lot of oral health problems. So I'm trying to be intellectually honest here. While I'm against circumcision of men and women, of boys, I mean, obviously if you're an adult and you want to do it, I think that's fine. But we have to be honest and say that sometimes the human body does produce things that are detrimental to our health. The question really here is that are the perceived benefits, do they outweigh the risks? And certainly there are risks involved, and we'll talk about one situation that's very controversial, and that's the question of the Jewish community and how they choose to circumcise the ultra-Orthodox, how they choose to circumcise their children. And in New York City, there was a case, I think they've had 14 infants have been infected with the herpes virus. And the reason that they're infected with a herpes virus from circumcision is because a mohel, is what they're known as, they will sometimes, in the ultra-Orthodox community, will perform a circumcision, but they will do it with their teeth. And when I say they do it with their teeth, they actually cut the infant, and then the mohel will then lean over the infant child, and grab the, I don't want to perform this, we're on camera now, I don't want to like act this out, but the mohel will actually grab the foreskin with his teeth and pull it back, pull the foreskin off with his teeth. And what is happening is that these infants are being infected. If the mohel has herpes on his lip, then he will transmit herpes to the baby, and 14 infants have been infected with herpes, and 2 of them have died since because of these procedures. Now, that seems to me to be a public health risk, and to me, obviously that's the kind of thing that I think anyone kind of like recoils from. But you know, if you try and say that this is wrong, that this should be illegal, people would say you're anti-Semitic. And that's a real debate that goes on, and there's always these accusations of anti-Semitism, or that you're against religion. You know, certainly a famous atheist by the name of Christopher Hitchens, if you don't know who he was very much against circumcision, and he was also very much against religion. And you couldn't necessarily, I guess you could say he was anti-Semitic, but he was also anti all religions. So if that means that you're anti-Semitic, then I guess he's probably guilty as charged. But again,
in a religious sense,
in a religious sense rather than an ethnic one.
I
right.
respond to a few things you just said.
Go
I'd
ahead.
first note that while we live in a flawed world and there are, you know, health consequences, health problems that arise naturally, we also have naturally the ability to think through medical issues and to come up with innovative solutions to these problems, like removing wisdom teeth, like circumcising men to reduce the incidence of viruses, and not just viruses, but also cancer and urinary tract infections, which you will contract with or without certain sexual contact.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead. You had some other points?
Yeah, sure. Well, as far as, you know, religious ceremonies go and circumcision being performed irresponsibly, you can have a good medical procedure that is performed in a bad and irresponsible way outside the context of the medical profession, and that's not necessarily a point against that procedure. So, you know, it can be good for some people to have their appendix removed, but you don't want parents, you know, going in and doing it themselves if they're not trained surgeons. So that is a problem we should address.
But is it a religious freedom issue?
I think that you can't just, you know, abuse and harm your children, even if you're doing so under the guise of some religious value.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, you know, faith healers commit violence against their children when they don't provide their children medical care. But that's not a point against circumcision in and of itself.
Right. So you, again, this is the debate is between the health issues and the moral issues. You know, personally, on the moral side, I feel like I have to be opposed because I believe that that a child should have the right to decide what happens with their body. You know, and wisdom teeth is not exactly the best example that you can compare it to, because wisdom teeth don't come in until you're older. So you do have a right to decide whether or not you want your wisdom teeth to come in or not. But it just seems wrong to me.
Vaccines, though, are an inexorable change. You don't unvaccinate yourself. You get vaccinated and that's it. So why don't you think that children should also have to make that decision for themselves when they're older?
Because the health risks involved, the purported health benefits of circumcision are, again, they come about when you're at the age of consent, because it's all about your sexual health, right? So babies aren't having sex. The difference is that babies can be infected with diseases as a child. So that again, that example doesn't exactly hold up. Because
well, but there's not just viruses, but infections and also cancer. And specifically, in infancy, you're more prone to urinary tract infections than at any other year in your life.
But babies aren't going to be getting cancer of the penis because they don't have circumcision. They're not being circumcised.
It's less likely, but the risk is increased.
Right. But on the moral issue and the ethical issue, it all comes down to the age of consent.
However, as far as urinary tract infections go, it is common for uncircumcised infants to get urinary tract infections.
Right. Well, okay, so then here's the issue. Let's talk about the sexual pleasure issue. And some people have debated on this. You know, obviously the reason why people circumcise women is because they wish to deny them sexual pleasure. This is the cutting off. There's three different kinds of circumcision that they do for women, and I'll read those to you because I just found I found these this morning. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, recognizes three types of female circumcision. Type 1 removes the clitoral hood and or the tip. Type 2 removes the hood, clitoris, and part or all of the labia. And type 3, also known as infibulation or pharaonic circumcision, involves removal of all external female genitalia and suturing of the vaginal opening. Male circumcision can be compared to type 1 or 2. Although the glans is not harmed at the time of circumcision, the loss of protective structures causes it to dry out and lose sensitivity over time. This is the World Health Organization. It is also important to note that most of the nerves and pleasure receptors present in the clitoris are, in the male, present in the foreskin and its associated structure, the frenulum. Removal of these nerves constitutes a loss that can be most adequately compared to a partial clitoridectomy. Now, this is another reason why I have a problem with it, because if you didn't know, all human beings are actually they're what's the word?
The default fetal state is female.
Right, you knew exactly what I was saying. So we're all by default in the womb females until a rush of hormones comes along to alter the chromosomes, right? So what happens is that inside the womb we all sort of have a vaginal structure that then turns into a penis, and when that process goes wrong, you sometimes have, what's the word for someone with both of the
Down
genitals?
syndrome?
No, when they have both male and female genitals. What's the word for that? Okay, it's
hermaphrodite.
Hermaphrodite, yeah, that's it. So again, nature sometimes works in mysterious ways, but the reality is that our genitals are actually remarkably similar, even though we're different. And so we males actually have similar structures on the outside of the penis as women do with their clitorises. They both have similar sensitivities. So again, another reason why I'm against this procedure is because it does remove sensitivity of the male organ, the male member. And to me, I mean, if you were a man, I mean, I think most men would probably like to know what it would be like to have that. And also, the World Health Organization talks about how it does dry out and lose sensitivity over time. You know, the reason why we have these foreskins is because it was supposed to protect our member. You know, we're the gender that has an external. We have external genitalia, and that's obviously that's a dangerous thing to have if, you know, out in nature, to have flapping around out there. And so nature devised a way to protect it from danger and to keep it moist, which I think, you know, that's you know, nasty thing to talk about, but that's reality. You know, nature is what it is. And so another reason why I'm opposed to circumcision in men, not just in women, is because of the fact that it does remove sensitivity, and because I think that no matter what you think about you know, the health benefits, a man should be able to choose, and they should be able to experience pleasure just like women should be able to experience pleasure. What do you say, Ian?
Well, you're perfectly right to point out that we evolved the faculties we have for a reason, and they serve an evolutionary purpose, and that's always something we should consider. We shouldn't just presume that we're exempt from biology and from our development, but also we developed a brain and the ability to develop medical techniques to mitigate risks, and that's something we should consider here. There's maybe some negatives to consider along with the positives, but there clearly are a lot of well-documented positives to male circumcision, whereas with female circumcision, there is strictly negatives, there are only risks, there are no even purported benefits. So I think when intactivists act like the two are interchangeable, I do think that's intellectually dishonest.
I could probably agree with you that they're not necessarily interchangeable. However, there are comparisons that, such as the sexual pleasure issue, that I think people should be looking at, and it's something that you should consider. The religious issue we'll have to debate another day. We're kind of going long here. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off.
Well, I would also add quickly that suppose your parents decided, for the sake of some purported benefit to your pleasure, they weren't going to have you circumcised as an infant, and then you contracted a urinary tract infection and had cancer. I think that you would have preferred to have been circumcised, even if there is some anecdotal evidence to suggest your pleasure would be lessened.
Right. The only problem with that is that once it's done, and there's no takebacks, and you'll never be able to know what it was like to experience sexual pleasure with a foreskin, because for all we know, for all us American men know, it could be better.
It's true in both cases, though. You could have intractable health problems that could have been averted.
It's true. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching. If you've watched this entire YouTube, it's a very long one, but I really am glad that you guys are here. We've had an explosive amount of growth in the amount of listeners for the Freedom Report, which is really exciting. Yesterday's podcast had over 10,000 downloads. Really exciting. And so, listen, do us a favor. If you like the Freedom Report, subscribe to us on iTunes, subscribe to us on Stitcher. You can find us at the front of thelibertarianrepublic.com, and we've got something really exciting going on. If you are watching the YouTube video, you can see this. We've got a replica of George Washington's flintlock pistol right here, and if you guys sign up for our email list this month, then you get a chance to win George Washington's flintlock. You could win George Washington's flintlock pistol. So sign up for our email list, and you'll be entered in a chance to win. We'll pull it out of a hat and send it your way. So thank you very much for listening, and come back every single day to your home for economic freedom and personal liberty at thelibertarianrepublic.com.